Hello, everyone. I just wanted to do another broadcast. It's been about 10 days since my last one, and I'm constantly trying to get out information to the beta testers about how to do things. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about importing armies into Wargame Simulator. There were some bugs last week recorded by a couple of playtesters about getting their armies in, and I just wanted to kind of go through that process. And that is how we are going to start this. So, first and foremost is the entire army import system is built around new recruit. This is an army building tool put out kind of the wake of Battlescribe. If you're kind of if you've been in the scene for a long time, you probably remember Battlescribe printing out their list, building lists in Battlescribe, and all of that was based on the really hard work of Battlescribe data developers, kind of coding up and building files that could be read by Battlescribe. Battlescribe was then discontinued or wasn't receiving any updates, so another developer came forward based on the same files and built New Recruit. New Recruit is just a web app, it's a little more modern, receives updates. I've actually spoken with the developer once or twice himself just to get an idea of how they utilize the Battlescribe files and how easy it would be to build a custom importer, but I haven't gone any further in that direction. But what you essentially do is you go to Battlescribe, newrecruit.eu. So this is just an example one. You can click to try it out. And from there you can build a list inside New Recruit. You hit create list, you can choose a faction. I'm just going to go with Xenos Tyranids. I'm going to call it Tyranids 2. You put a cost limit, force, and you create the list. And here you can kind of go through and add armies, units, select abilities, select armaments where appropriate for your entire list. So you generally start with the battle size. I'm going to select 1,000 points. For the detachment, I'm going to select the assimilation score on the first one. And we're just kind of going to try to rush through this process, get an idea of how it works. We're going to add a character. So here I'm just going to hit Broodlord. I'm going to add a Broodlord character. I'm adding the Broodlord because he's the model that I have on the screen behind me. And so you select the Broodlord, you can make him your Warlord. It gives you warnings when things aren't validated appropriately. And we're just going to add another single unit to give an idea of how it works. We're going to add some Termagants. This is my standard Tyranid testing army, 1 Broodlord, 10 Termagants. And then you just have to export the list. That's this export button. Now there's a few ways you can export. You can export a ROS-Z or a ROS file. These are both XML files. And apparently they've added JSON, probably been there for a while, and I just haven't brought the screen up very much. I definitely want to work with JSON instead of XML files. But you download one of these and you can open it up and kind of see what the XML file looks like. We're going to open it up and so these files, they generally have more structure. This isn't structured or looking very pretty, but it does have all the information about the army you just built. For example, we can find the Broodlord. And here's the information about the Broodlord. You can go find his movement characteristic, which is right here. You have an 8. His toughness is 5. Basically, we just parse this document into a list inside of Wargame Simulator. So here we'll actually do that right now. We'll go over to Wargame Simulator. We'll go to an army. We'll delete this army out of this game. I'm already in a game right here. Now I can choose and upload an army. I'm going to choose my Tyranids 2, the one I just created. And I'll upload it, and here's the Broodlord and Termagants, and everything else that was in that army list as exported by a New Recruit. Now I'd have to assign things that are unique to Wargame Simulator, such as if I want this army to be controlled by an AI, I can save those changes. I can also assign transponders to the units. But right now I have 2 armies in here. Now one interesting thing, and this kind of speaks to the development path and kind of decisions around development that I've made, is I don't do any validation on my side, on the Wargame Simulator side, that the list is correct. I've decided not to have any actual stat lines or any confirmation that there's no funny business going on. That kind of was all taken care of in the new recruit. But that does allow for some interesting things to happen, and I'll show you what that is. Here's our Tyranid2.ros file, and as I pointed out, we do have this movement of our Broodlord. Right? Our Broodlord has a movement characteristic of 8. And if you look at the Broodlord stats in here, his movement characteristic is 8. But as I said, my system doesn't store any actual values for what these units are, what their names are. It doesn't store any of that, it reads it all from the file. I just didn't want to deal with list validation. That's a very difficult problem that is being handled well by other people. So I'm not terribly concerned with myself. But that does leave an avenue for both cheating, but also custom play. For example, we're going to go back to our file. This is the file that we downloaded. And if we change this movement characteristic to, let's say, 12. So now Broodlord would have a movement characteristic of 12. That's not going to change the list until we re-import it. But let's just delete this army. Choose another roster file. We'll choose our Tyranid 2. Now we have saved that again with the new 12-inch movement speed by our Broodlord. That happens sometimes. There's a bug that happens when importing a newly saved .ros file like that. But if we go back in here to our game, we can go to our armies. Here's our army. You can see our Broodlord does have a movement characteristic of 12. So you are allowed to, outside of the actual game, change and modify unit characteristics. You can go into it as far as editing and replacing special abilities or rules. If you understand ROS files well enough and feel comfortable with editing them, you could, for example, take a rule like Shadow in the Warp, which is a characteristic, or it's just a rule of the Broodlord, kind of find out where it begins and ends, and copy that. Like here, I think, is where it ends. So you copy this rule onto another unit, and that unit would essentially be able to play with that rule. So this allows, I mostly decided to take this route for customization purposes. I'm trying to build this system where you can create custom campaigns, where you can have single player campaigns and be able to play with custom models or custom rule sets or custom abilities depending on the scenario that exists. Like if you would like your Swarm Lord to have 50 wounds and it's like a big monster that has to be taken down by one side, you can do that. Or you can make it deadlier in close combat by giving it a rule that has +1 attack, movement, +16 attacks. You can modify whatever you would like. You can modify the number of attacks. Like here's his melee weapons and his Broodlord claws and talents. We can modify the number of attacks, which is currently 6. We could give this 25 and it becomes a complete monster. And I decided to keep this kind of functionality in as a way for people to be able to customize their own gaming experience if they want to play with more custom things. It also forces a programming methodology that forces the inclusion of other games and other game types. You don't want to limit your statistic, your army stat lines to what only exists in one game. You want to be able to modify it appropriately, and this is a step in that direction. So you could as well add things like keywords like lance to a weapon, and now that ability will come down with lance when used in the game. So this just adds for a layer of customization to single player battles that I think people should just be aware of in case they want to develop that sort of system. Another reason why I've kind of gone this way is it is possible inside of the system to export a game. And what this would do is it exports the entire game settings, including the army list, or this is the idea. And so you can share a game, including where all the terrain was placed, including army personalities and army setups, as a custom scenario you can share with someone else. And maybe it's a custom scenario of the Battle of McCrag that you set up and painstakingly built rules, events, deployment zones, and other characteristics into the game. You'd want to share it with someone so they can try it out, kind of like a custom game mode. And being able to modify army characteristics, if right now it's done outside of the Wargame Simulator ecosystem, kind of in these ROS files, does allow for that level of customization. So now I'd like to go over some bugs that people are having. One bug that was reported was game sizes of 500 points weren't allowing the game to start, and that's been fixed. There was issues with uploading larger army lists. Typically I only play with this Broodler Termagants versus Brother Champions Strike Squad so I can quickly iterate through bugs. But there was an issue when you had too many units in an army list, and it was causing a few issues, especially when the army list contained actually movement characteristics such as, or in this case it was attack characteristics such as like 2d6. You had 2d6 attacks, and it just wasn't interpreting that as an appropriate number. So both of those issues are currently fixed, and now we're just going to go through kind of the remainder of the setup process, just so we can get a better idea of how that works. I think setting up the game is probably the most difficult part of using the system, and I think it's kind of important to just continue to go over that. So first I'm going to assign my transponders to these two units. Brother Champion, which has this little elemental one still. And I am also going to modify this army a little bit. Okay, this one's already controlled by the AI. We're going to go into the second unit, which is the Strike Squad. We are going to see what it has. It has this one. Okay, and then at the top here we're going to do the Tyrannid. This is the Tyrannid army just created. He needs this one. Now the big bug that was fixed this week had to do with the accuracy of detections when taking an image. And that was what I spent most of my time this week working on, is kind of improving the accuracy of the detection model, including a retraining. Let's make sure you got the right one. These guys got these. You'll remember I was trying to get, it wasn't accurately detecting some of the transponders, and my transponder actually was surprisingly low. So I've made some changes to improve that. The downside of those improvements is now it's not accurately recognizing black and white objectives. So if you are using black and white objectives, they are not being recognized like the colorful printout objectives or the plastic objectives that I'm using on my table behind me. So we're just going to modify this army. We're going to make it AI controlled, save those army changes. And now we have two armies, all with their transponders. We have a map set up, and I'll kind of get into this map setup a little bit more. But we have the map set up, and we're pretty much ready to start. I do need to connect the camera. So I'm going to pull up my camera page, pull up my phone. connect my phone to it. And now whenever I connect my phone, I like just going over to the map tab. This photo button will light up. And this becomes kind of a sanity check for that tab, where I take a photo, it goes through the analysis, it tries to detect things, and it kind of makes sure that it detected the things that I wanted. So now we can see in, I call this the digital map view, we have some units, and it seems to detect all the units, but most importantly we can toggle between kind of this digital map view, and the camera image. And this generally should show us where things are at. So you can see some objectives. There's some other map artifacts on here that I was messing around with. We'll get into that in a second. But here's kind of where things are. You'll see that because my camera isn't centered, I'm missing a portion of the board off here to the left. My deployment zone estimates aren't, we literally just can't see the board over there. So anything that happens on that part of the board, I'm not going to be able to see. But I also have a bunch of other things on here as well. And it's kind of good to get a good idea to see what it's detecting by kind of seeing what detected. You can see it's now detecting our transponders a lot better. It's detecting models accurately, and we have this. It's also detecting our dice tray box a little bit better. So these are kind of getting us our, kind of showing that it's working appropriately. One thing that I have put some work into is the development of custom terrain sets. Now, I can, in this terrain area right here, select a terrain layout, like let's say an urban battlefield. It's a pre-defined set of buildings and their locations on the map. And you can see, given where our camera is, this is where those buildings should theoretically be. I'm going to make them a little bit, I'm going to make them a little bit more transparent. But that's where those buildings would be, and if we were to use that terrain layout. Now, we can select a different terrain layout. There is a poorly put together Pariah Nexus Layout 1, which you can see where those buildings are at in that one. They're all gray because they're abandoned buildings, just a coloring technique. And then you can also select this forest battlefield, which has 5 forests in it, just in those locations. And you can see where they'd be in the normal kind of digital world. The digital world is kind of how the AI sees it, and then how it actually exists on one's map. And I've been working pretty hard on getting custom terrain in. So if you select a custom terrain, it then turns all your terrain. You can then modify the terrain pieces that currently exist. I'm going to delete all my forest ones that I have up there by just deleting them. So now there's no terrain in this. I'm going to save the terrain. Sometimes when you save, it does mess up where the objectives are. That's a known bug. I'm working on it. To fix that, just take another photo, and it'll analyze where everything's at. And you get your objectives placed again. Okay, so now one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off these bounding boxes, and I'm going to enter my custom terrain drawing mode. This is if you want to put terrain where you want and not in a predefined layout. You're allowed to draw on this field. I'm going to just kind of highlight around this guy, pretend that's a piece of terrain, and complete my shape, and there I have a piece of terrain added to the board. And if I turn on the line of sight, you'll see that's another problem. I'll fix that. So I'm now going to save my custom terrain. I'm going to take another photo, and we'll see kind of how that custom terrain maps out. So there's where the terrain should be. There it is in the digital world. Here it is in the real world, and that's kind of how you place pieces of custom terrain. And you can see now that it's kind of recognized by the line of sight detectors as that's the terrain, and there's where the units can see on the battlefield. So that's kind of a way to get custom terrain into a battle. If you just want to kind of like use the image from above, draw around them, and get terrain into the system. The system does not do a good job of recognizing terrain. Terrain is just too varied and in general too large and causes too many problems with detecting. And so you kind of keep the digital map of it and translate that digital map to the to where it would exist on the battlefield, and then you can represent that by actual pieces of terrain. You can also do something very similar, and I'm just going to talk about this real quick, with deployment zones. Right now, there's only 3 custom deployment zones layouts, and they're not even named correctly. We have one where the deployment zones are kind of at the far edges, and that's where they'd be on the battlefield with the current layout. There's another where it's kind of kitty corner to each other, and that's where they'd be. And then there's just the standard long table edges. Now, maybe you want to play with something more custom. Maybe you want to play a kind of ambush mission. And this ambush mission, none of these deployment zone layouts work appropriately for the custom mission that you're trying to design. So what you do there is you would select a custom deployment zone, but then keep these 2 deployment zones. But I'm going to get rid of, let's say, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to get rid of the red deployment zone up top, and then we're going to draw in a deployment zone. Let's say can be ambushed. So we're going to put one in the middle right there. I'm then going to complete my zone. It's right there. I'm going to save my custom deployment zones. Oh, it's Blue's deployment zone. I forgot to select whose zone it was. But you can see that's where it is on our other map. There's where it is on this map. And let's say you wanted a red ambush zone. So the red people are going to, team red in this case, is going to be, let's say, ambushing. So we're just going to draw out red's deployment zone, like that. And then we have red's deployment zone. I'm going to save my deployment zones. And these are the deployment zones that the AI will technically use when he's playing the game. If he's assigned to red, he'll deploy inside the red. If he's assigned to blue, he'll deploy in one of the blue zones. And that is how you get custom data or information in. You can technically draw your deployment zones on the digital map, and they'll be translated over to the photo map if you'd like, or you can draw the photo map and transfer it over to the digital map. Either way, it's a way to build and save custom terrain. And so that's kind of the demonstration that I want to go through today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me on Discord. I look forward to chatting with all of you.